Hey, welcome to another Wildlife Q&A. I have a great question from Jason, except it's just way too long for me to memorize, so that's impossible. I'll just mess it all up. So I'm actually going to read it, and the answer is going to be better suited by a screencast. So I'm actually going to share the answer that way by showing some example photos and how I adjust things. The general question, though, is he asks about using auto white balance with raw and how I set it afterwards. So like setting the white balance in the field versus not, and just adjusting it in post. Just to quickly answer, I use auto white balance all the time, shooting with raw. Then I simply adjust it in post, either to be accurate or creative. And now I'll show you how.
Okay, so Jason writes in and asks, he says, wildlife inspired episode on shorebirds that I did with Scott, which if you aren't familiar with that, definitely check that out. It's worth a look. It's just search for wildlife inspired on the YouTube channel, and there's some good content Scott's still doing there, and some in the past I did with him, so definitely worth subscribing to that. So Jason says, at one stage you said words along the lines of cameras often get white balance wrong. And then he says, so I use auto white balance and correct in post. I must say I have experienced the same thing, especially in low light conditions. I seem to get a magenta color cast on photos taken in certain conditions. I shoot in RAW and normally use auto white balance too. I have been carrying an Xrite color checker passport with me, but sometimes it is difficult or inconvenient to use this in the field with a long lens. I have a 500mm f4 with a minimum focus distance of 4.5 meters, and there isn't always a neutral gray item in the photo I have taken to set the white balance on when doing it in post. I was wondering what techniques you use to correct color. Are there any online tutorials you can recommend? P.S. I'm in Australia. Kind regards, from Jason. All right, so that's a great question. And to answer that, first off, I have never tried to use like one of the Xrite color checkers or any of those, in the field gray cards, basically, to actually white balance the scene. I mean, for nature and wildlife, that sounds pretty impossible to ever get. I mean, you'd have to be shooting the exact same scene pretty consistently. And with shooting raw and the fact that you can change the white balance after the fact, I kind of don't ever see a reason to do that. And I very rarely probably actually color correct and adjust the white balance to where it's true neutral, so completely accurate to whatever the scene was. I color correct everything by eye. That being said, I'll use the white balance tool in Lightroom to get me started sometimes, but let's see what else he says. Yeah, it's difficult to do that in the field. No kidding. That sounds like an absolute pain. And finding neutral gray in the photo when doing it in post. Yeah, like I said, I'll show you some examples in a little bit. But yeah, I don't, I pretty much do it all by eye. So for example, I just shot this the other day. Not an amazing photo, but camera totally got the white balance wrong. This grass was super green. The deer itself was not magenta and blue toned like it is here. So for me, I mean, I could try grabbing the white balance tool and then kind of clicking there, and there we go. Got lucky. That worked pretty good. That's definitely a lot more accurate to what it is. The other option would be I would just shift the white balance warm, shift the white balance more green, and I'd probably end up somewhere in there where it was actually even warmer. And then I'd probably throw a grad on here and make the foreground even more green to really accentuate that green. So that would be how I change the white balance. Obviously it needs help with lighting. The lighting wasn't great, but something along those lines. So let's hit a few more. Again, cool, way too cool lighting, or way too cool white balance, I should say. It was a clear sunny day, but the sun was not yet hitting this area. This is a seaside sparrow, and the whites and this part on the bird are supposed to be gray, not blue like this. So again, I could use the white balance tool, click there. There we go, much closer. But still, I'd probably go a little bit warmer, a little bit more green, and then obviously lighten it up as well, but something like that. And then, I mean, maybe in reality there was some blue tones in there, but I don't think they were that intense. So I would probably come in actually in the saturation section over here and pull these blues those blue tones down a little bit. So there's the better white balance there. Here's another one. At sunset, most of the sunlight was kind of gone, but this would be the more accurate white balance. I should shift it green just a touch, maybe a little bit warmer. So, pull the highlights back down, but that would be the much more accurate white balance and color tone in that. And then something like this where the camera got it way wrong. So there was nothing but sun, like warm tones reflecting off the water here and everything like that. Again, this is a herring gull. This bird is not blue at all. It's just completely white and gray. Actually, I shouldn't say. The back gray feathers sometimes have slightly blue tones to them, but the breast definitely should be white. So a great starting place would be using the white balance tool. There we go. I clicked. But it looks a little bit too magenta, so I'd probably go a little bit more warm and pull the tint down to the left, so it's a little bit more green. Maybe a little bit magenta, something like that. Anyway, that's a more accurate white balance and look like what I saw in the scene. And then something like this where, again, right, this black skimmer, there's no blue in this bird's feathers. And the light was really, really weird and a really weird angle. But this is one where I would correct it to be more accurate, but also be a little creative, right? So at this time of the morning, it was probably more like if I were to, let's just pull the blues down on that. That's probably close, maybe something like that to what it actually looked like to me that day when I took it. That being said, this is not a very compelling image as far as this color goes. So for me, I would actually just jack the white balance up like that, bring the magentas in, kick the highlights up a little bit, bring the blacks back down. Maybe something like that. That's where I'd probably end up with. This is not even remotely what it looked like. The sun was pretty high at this point, and even though it was being filtered through some soft clouds, it was definitely did not have this early morning or late evening tone to it. But that looks like a better image to me, so that's what I would do. So I definitely take creative license. Here's a Carolina wren. This is pretty accurate white balance, actually. The camera kind of nailed. This is what it looked like looking through the lens. That being said, this is kind of a weird, boring image, so there we go. I would want to go kind of get some tone in it and make it kind of yellowy orange so it looks like early morning or late evening sun shining through there. To me, that's just a more interesting image. The other way I could go is to go completely cool with it, right? If I wanted to make it look like a kind of like a dusky kind of moon, maybe it was looking through like moonlight or something like that. Now that's too blue, so I'd desaturate it a little bit, but there's something kind of, like icy toned like that. That could be an interesting look as well. Like either of those looks are more interesting than the actual accurate white balance. So this is where I get into just getting creative with the white balance. Here's a perfect example, I think. Let's see. Yeah, that's the complete original tone. So I went there with it. So you can see I jacked the white balance up and made it much warmer to make it look even more like sunrise, which it was. And there was some tone in that. It was that kind of orangey color, but probably not this much. And then, yeah, there we go. I think that was the last example I had, but yeah. So hopefully that answers your question. Thanks so much for asking that, Jason. And thanks so much for watching, everybody. Thanks so much for submitting questions. And if you have a question you'd like to ask me about wildlife photography, hop on over to my website at rayhennessy.com and submit the question there. And I might just choose it for a future episode. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you like everything I've been sharing here. And I share a ton of other stuff on my website. Blog posts, articles, other instructional videos that aren't even available on this YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to the email list on my website to get exclusive tips, tricks, and offers. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll have more to share again soon.